Hello, everybody. So I chose to do my rhetorical criticism on Senua's Sacrifice, which is an award-winning video game. The game follows the story of Senua, a piked woman with severe psychosis. From a young age, she was actually abused because of it, and the one person who she loved and treated her normally passed away. From this point in the story, she actually goes on a quest to retrieve his soul and to bring him back from the dead. Although she does not succeed, she actually comes to a realization about her mental health. Now that you know a little bit about the story, let's get into the analysis. So my thesis statement is that video games are an underrepresented communications device, but when used properly by a writer can be effective at changing an audience's biases and media-created stigmas. So now the artifact description. We're starting with the writer. So the mastermind behind this story is Tamim Antoniades, the lead designer and CEO of Ninja Theory, which is the company that made Senua's Sacrifice. The reason behind his decision to make the game was that he had a friend who deals with psychosis, and he wanted to reverse a stigma and bring his friend's life to light. Tamim Antoniades, in order to create an accurate picture of psychosis, actually hired Paul Fletcher, a neuroscientist at Cambridge University, as a consultant. His guidance was an integral part of the success of the project, and he too should be considered a writer. Next is the audience. The audience is obviously going to be video gamers, but more specifically, demographics show that the majority of gamers are male, as they are 3 times more likely to make video game purchases. This game could have actually had a massive impact on men as well, as men tend to be a little more ignorant of mental health issues. Having less depression diagnosis but a higher rate of suicide is one of the things that tells us this. Thus, I think games like this actually help bring the importance of mental health to light for these individuals. Next is the occasion. The game was released in 2018, very recently, and there is a current push for equal media representation, such as movies like Us or Crazy Rich Asians. See, there is media created about mental health, but the issue with that is that it's not accurate. It gives us movies like Split or Joker that paints these people as villains. But with this context, a game that depicts mental illness accurately could not have happened at a better time. The method of criticism that I chose was narrative criticism. The first reason that I did that is that Senua's Sacrifice, by definition, has all requirements to make it a narrative. A narrative requires 2 events. One event is Senua's mental illness, and the other is her objective. Secondly, there needs to be a logical sequence of event and a cause and effect relationship between them. Both of these come from Senua's flashbacks. It also requires an overarching subject, which is Senua and her mental suffering. Lastly, the reason that I picked narrative criticism is because what narrative criticism focuses on, which are strong characters, events, structures, temporal relations, etc. Senua's Sacrifice has all of these things, and I thought it would be really smart to dissect each of these things through the lens of narrative criticism, since narrative criticism already basically does that. Also, narrative criticism requires an objective, which in Senua's Sacrifice's case is to change an existing false stigma that has been created by inaccurate depictions in media by using an underrepresented method of communication, video games. In the findings section of my essay, I cover 3 things: causal/temporal relations, mechanics/degree of interactivity, and themes. However, in this presentation, I was unable to cover the first 2 because I run out of time. So I'll instead uncover just my findings about themes because I think it's the most interesting. First, and it's broken up into 2 different sections, sorry. First being the normalization of mental illness, and second is how Senua and her mental illness is not the villain of this story. When we watch psychological films, the film always wants you to question what is real and what is invented by the mind of the character. This, however, is not what Antoniades and Fletcher wanted. Instead, they wanted the audience to essentially empathize and live in the shoes of Senua. Interestingly enough, people with severe psychosis do not question what is real or if it's all in their head, etc. They simply live each day in their own reality, and everything that they see or hear is real to them. Thus, not once does the game allude to the question of what is real or what is fake. You are just supposed to push along in the story and get invested into the world that Ninja Theory created. Now, I really couldn't figure out how to create a bullet point list for this one, so just listen. But one thing that the game pushes for is to not make Senua or even her mental illness the villain. Throughout her life, Senua was abused by her father, making her believe that she had a darkness that is her mental illness. This darkness she believes is going to kill her, so she eventually ran from her father to be with the only person who treated her normally, Dillian. This happens in her flashback, but in the story that happens in present day, Dillian has already passed away, and she goes on a quest to bring him back to life. However, Senua fights her metaphoric darkness that has manifested into a being called Hela. At the end, we watch as Hela actually kills Senua, but in a few moments later, we see that Hela transforms into Senua. Now, I know this is difficult to follow, but this is essentially metaphorical, showing that the darkness that she was fighting was within herself. And in this fight, she killed the part of herself that believed that she was cursed because of the abuse and this negative stigma of herself that was given to her by her father. However, at this scene, or by the end of the scene, the voices in Senua's head continue to talk, showing that mental illness itself is not the villain or something inherently bad, but it is the stigma we give to these people and the fact that they are not accepted for who they are that actually hurts them in the end and causes them to mentally suffer. So with all this being said, how do we apply this to rhetorical theory? Well, the two things that I discovered is that 1, video games can and should be used as a legitimate communications medium, because it's so easily to get inversed into a character's shoes if you actually play as them and embody them. There are too many games that tell stories not worth telling or no story at all, like Fortnite or Call of Duty. Lastly, we need to stop creating media that is inaccurate and paints people with mental illnesses as villains. Mental illness should only be included in communication mediums if the writer intends on doing research to ensure that no false stigmas can be created from their work.